Hey all, Tom Moran here from Tom's Big Spiders. In this episode, we're going to be rehousing one of the true giants of the hobby, Theraphosa Blondi, or the Goliath Birdeater. This one is infamous even with people who don't generally keep tarantulas, only because of the amount of media attention it usually gets. As a matter of fact, just the other day, I was online surfing and happened to pull up a news article about the Theraphosa Blondi being one of the biggest spiders in the world. So it does captivate a lot of people because it is a huge spider with reports of them getting up to 12 inches. So in this episode, we're going to go ahead and rehouse my big girl, my female, who's now probably pushing 9 inches or so. And I'm going to give some husbandry details of how I've kept her. So enough of me talking. Let's visit Theraphosa Blondi, or the Goliath Birdeater. All right, so we're about to rehouse one of the giants, a Theraphosa Blondi or Goliath Birdeater. I picked this one up in, I believe, spring of 2018 from Fear Not Tarantulas. At that time, it was about 1.5 inches or so. And it came in these here, which I'll flash on the screen, these acrylic containers that are about 8 inches by 4 inches by 3 inches. But after a molt or two, they were kind of too big for that. So what we did is move them a few months later into a Systema enclosure. I've used these quite a bit. I like them for juveniles. They're about 101 ounces or 3 liters, measure about 8.5 inches by 6 inches by 4.5 inches. And at that point, they were doing some burrowing. They were staying out of sight. This is a species that you want to keep moist. It's a moisture-dependent species, considered to be one of the most moisture-dependent species, and the trick to keeping them moist is to give them enclosures that they can burrow in, and it offers some room for substrate, so you can keep those bottom levels of substrate moist. You can let the tops dry out a little bit, and then of course you always give them water dishes. So what we did is move them afterwards into what we have here, which is one of the Sterilite 15 quart or 14 liter containers. These measure about 17 inches by 11.5 inches by 6.5 inches. As far as no frill enclosures, they work great. I use these for a lot of my larger terrestrials that hit, 7, even 8 inches or so. It offers a decent amount of space, decent amount of room for burrowing. However, this one here is well over 8 inches now, and she's going to be getting something brand new. So what we have over here is going to be her adult enclosure, at least for the time being. If we get one of the 12-inch monsters that everybody prays for, we might have to put her in something a little bit larger. But this is a 10-gallon Lorex Plastics enclosure. I picked these up, I think it was about 75 bucks shipped a year and a half ago or so. It was before we moved. And unfortunately, the price has gone up a bit. I got a funny feeling this one here took some damage when it was shipped. I did get a replacement one for it, so I had to try to fix this one up. So I think that probably they're getting some damage during shipping, so the prices are going up a little bit to compensate for it. But awesome enclosures. They have the drilled holes in the side. What we have here for substrate is the BioDude Terra Aranya substrate. We got about 6 inches over here, and it goes down to probably about 3 inches over here. But this is the spot that I expect the spider to burrow and congregate in. We come here, a starter burrow. We have some leaf litter. There are springtails in here. I just cleaned out the water dish and some of the springtails that ended up in the water dish. We have moss around the plant over here, and what we have here is a golden pothos epicurnum, I think is the name of it. I'll have to double check that. I probably just mispronounced it, and the plant people are going to kill me. But we do have a live plant in here. I want to give it some more places to hide when it came around here, so hopefully the plant will start growing around this way. Plus, it helps with the air quality. If you have a plant in there, it's sucking up some of those undesirables and producing oxygen. So hopefully this will make a nice little enclosure for it, and it won't immediately go and pull the plant up. We'll see how that goes. But I have had some luck with the plants in some other large terrestrial enclosures, and I'm looking over at my L. parahybana female. It's also a big beefy one. Also in one of these enclosures, she has a pothos, and it's doing fine. So we'll see how that goes. So what we are going to do is cup her here. With this one, I have noticed this time gloves on, long sleeves. That's because the hairs on these guys are known to be particularly bad. And please keep in mind, with any species with urticating hairs, everybody has different reactions to them. Some people don't have very big reactions at all. Some people, they really bother them. But one thing that has been proven, that the more you get exposed to the hair, the more they bother you. So you don't get used to it. You don't get more resistant to it. You actually become more sensitive to the hair. So I try to protect myself when possible. Also, if Billy zooms in just a little bit here, That's the web mat, the molt mat that it made when it molted a couple, I think it was about 2 months ago. And what you'll see is all the little hairs that they kick off. They'll kick off a bed of hairs to protect themselves when they flip. So any of those that come up or get on my hands would also cause my hands to become irritated. Now I'm realizing now, before she was over here, I was hoping to just quickly cup her and get her into this one, but I have a funny feeling she's going to end up underneath that cork bark. So let's see, let's get this here. Yeah, she's an absolutely stunning spider. Now, you can see she's squished up in there, and we'll get some good looks of her afterwards. She's actually very, very well behaved. I was talking to my buddy Charles, and I said I just didn't want to get hair kicked on me when I did this rehousing. He said his don't usually kick hair, they threat posture. And I have to say, I've had very good luck with all my Theraphosa species not kicking hair. The only times I've gotten hairs on me is when I've done maintenance and like a doofus picked something up from inside the enclosures that had hairs on them. Or, again, pulling the molts out. Sometimes the molts are covered with hair. So we're going to go ahead and try to put her right here, which will allow her to hopefully stay out in the open a little bit. There we go. Although I don't like when they're pointed toward the breech. All right, so there she is in her new home, which really allows her to pop. I don't know if it's going to come out in the camera, but the hairs that are on her legs there. And keep in mind the hairs on the knees are what the T. Blondi have. If this was a sturmy, you wouldn't have those long hairs on the knees, but those hairs have a pinkish hue to them. They are more than just big brown spiders. I find them fascinating personally because there is just something mind-blowing about a spider that can get that large. Now, a lot of folks talk about the fact they can get 12 inches. A more reasonable size is 10 to 11 inches. So if you get one, you can easily expect that. Although I would not discount the fact that there are probably some 12-inch specimens out there. The largest one, the one that's in the Guinness Book of World Records as the largest spider in terms of mass, meaning the size of it, the weight of it, that one was 11 inches, but I believe that was a wild-caught specimen, and we have had much better luck growing them in captivity to larger sizes. So the chances are that is not the largest specimen out there, and that these guys could rival the H. maxima or giant huntsman spider as the largest spider on the planet. Now, a couple notes about temperament. Again, some people have ones that will kick hairs. The hairs are nothing to scoff at, but others have ones that will throw up threat postures and act a little more defensive. My guys have been actually, this is pretty much what I get with mine. I've been very fortunate that she's been incredibly well behaved. Now, one thing that is not mentioned about them very often that needs to be mentioned is they are fast, especially the slings. I've seen a sling, an inch and a half inch sling, basically teleport across an enclosure to grab a cricket. Nobody ever mentions these. We usually talk about the fast arboreals, but they are very leggy as slings, and they can use those leggies to propel themselves very quickly across an enclosure. So it's something to note. They are also usually considered an advanced species because of the fact that they get big, because of those hairs, and because of that moisture dependency. And again, one of the reasons I like adding a plant in enclosure is because it kind of reminds you that you have to make sure that you keep those lower levels moist. So as with the plant, you don't need the substrate sopping wet on the surface. You want to make sure that you water it and that the moisture soaks down into it. I will put a little note up here, I forget what it's called, a tag or something, a little thing on the upper corner that will lead to a video where I show how I keep my moisture dependent species and how I go about keeping the moisture levels up, and talk a little bit about the fact that we don't need the entire thing sopping wet. We just need those lower levels to stay moist. All right, one thing that's mentioned with these guys is that they need really high temperatures. I've seen things that say that if they're not kept 80, 85 degrees, that they will not grow, they will do poorly. I have not found that to be true whatsoever. I kept these guys at my old house, would have temperatures in the low 70s throughout the winter time, and then in the summertime it would get up to 80 degrees. In the new house, I will say it gets a lot warmer up here in the summer, so we've had temperatures around 80 to 87 degrees in the summertime, which has been multipalooza over here. So recognize that they do not need those extra high temperatures that you sometimes read about. I've had people contact me freaking out and trying to use heat mats and heat lamps because their temperatures drop below 80 degrees. It's not going to impact them. They are amazing eaters and very fast growing. growers. I just did my fastest growing tarantula list, and these guys are by far one of the fastest growing ones. The two that I have went from about 1.5 inches to 5.5 to 6 inches within a year, which is amazing growth rate. They will slow down a little bit after that, but this is a spider that will molt frequently and put on massive size with each molt. So you start off with this little gangly sling, and before a year's time is up, you have something that's probably going to be one of the biggest spiders in your collection, and at that point is only a young adult. So one other thing to note about these behavior-wise, again, with that deep substrate, you may get some burrowing. That's a good thing. Don't freak out if they burrow. I've had Sturmy, I've had Theraphosa Blondi, and I've had Theraphosa apophysis. All of them did some digging and burrowing when they were slings, and some of them do it right up to young adulthood. This one here actually had dug and burrowed and had a burrow in its enclosure until the last molt where it filled it in. My other one still has a burrow that it hides in. So hopefully with this one here, if mine chooses to burrow, it will have this little area right in here to go do some burrowing, which will hopefully keep the moisture levels up there nice and high and keep it nice and healthy. So as far as feeding is concerned, I feed my slings usually twice a week. These guys are voracious eaters, even as slings, so expect them to eat a lot. And slings will eat medium to large crickets right off the bat. These are guys that start with pretty large food items. As they put on some size, I will switch to once a week or once every 6 weeks or so. I usually feed my juveniles large roaches or crickets or even sometimes superworms. The adults will get dubia roaches or a bunch of crickets or a bunch of bee lats. All right, so you'll see videos out there of people feeding them live mice. I'm not a proponent of that. It is very cruel to the mouse. That is not a good way to go. Think about how that mouse is going. Not a good thing. However, I have some people ask, is it okay if they feed it a thawed out mouse? You can do that. Just know that it does leave a heck of a mess. That's the biggest thing with feeding them the vertebrates, is that unlike the insects where they suck them dry, they leave a nice little dry bolus. It will take them a while to consume it, and in 24 hours time, if it's warm enough, that animal, those animal remains can start to become rancid, and what you'll be left with is this sopping, nasty bolus that is dripping biological material all over your substrate and creating a wonderful petri dish of bacteria in your enclosure, which you don't want. So that's the reason why I try to shy away from that. If you do it occasionally, just make sure you scoop out any area that bolus was or the substrate underneath it to get that material out of there so it doesn't fester and become a mess. Or if you're using isopods and springtails, that might be something they can handle it, but I'm not a huge proponent of that myself. But people do it, and it is something they would eat in the wild. So there we go. Theraphosa Blondi, absolutely, she couldn't have been any more well behaved. It almost looks like these are going to look like still shots because she's just not moving.
Just hanging out.
So there she is, Theraphosa Blondi, one of the true giants, you know, literally the biggest spider in the world, one of the biggest spiders you can possibly keep. I know some folks out there don't like them because they're not a fan of the big brown spiders, but honestly, I think that's just, I don't know, it's everybody to each their own. Everybody has the spiders they like. If everybody always liked the same ones, the hobby would be very narrow and not quite as diverse, but I happen to absolutely love these guys. There is just nothing like a spider this massive.
And pink.
And pink. The pinks are popping big time on that
beautiful
one. So there, for anybody that says they're just a big brown spider, that is not just a big brown spider. It's brown and pink. So as you can see, she was very well behaved. I've had very good luck with all my Theraphosa species. However, it's important to note that behavior can vary from specimen to specimen. So although mine may be very relaxed, other people may find theirs are defensive, which could include throwing up defense postures or even kicking hairs, and the hairs can be quite nasty. And considering that this is a spider that can get 10 inches easily, it's important to note that that size can be very intimidating to somebody who's not used to working with large spiders. So always keep that in mind. This is why this species is not usually recommended for beginners. They are large, the hairs are pretty nasty, and of course there's the moisture dependency. About humidity, I have never measured humidity inside my enclosures. I do kind of monitor the humidity of the room outside. Basically, it comes down to moist substrate. If you have an aquarium or an enclosure that has moist substrate and a good open water dish with fresh water in it, your tarantula can stay hydrated. Plus, as that moisture evaporates from the substrate, it's going to naturally raise the humidity humidity levels inside that enclosure to a healthy level for your tarantula. If in the summer you live in a place where it's much more humid, you're going to have to pay less attention to this. For example, folks in the Philippines might have a naturally humid environment, so this isn't such a big deal. However, in places where, say in the wintertime, the heat kicks on and things get drier, you're going to want to be a little more attentive to make sure that that substrate doesn't dry out and that that water dish is full at all times. That'll give it the necessary moisture it needs to survive and thrive. Also, if you notice in this video, we have a little new graphic that's called giant. I am going to start calling out some of the giant species because for some folks, size apparently does matter. So if I do have specimens that get over 7.5, 8 inches or so, I'm going to label them as giant so folks have an idea that this is going to be a big spider. So that will do it for this one. As always, if you liked it enough to subscribe, very much appreciate it. Click the little circle up in there. If you want to check out more videos in the meantime, see what I'm about, you'll find them over here. If you leave a comment, know that I will respond to all comments, but it can sometimes take me a couple days because I tend to get a lot of them. That'll do it for this one, guys. Stay safe. We'll catch you all next time.